because we're a prequel, you know, there was an opportunity to tell a bit of the backstory of the gravity gun in, like, these are the prototype for it. You see something in Half-Life 2, and then there's a backstory to it. But you don't want to go all the way and just explain the entire story of how this thing came to be. You want to come back a little bit. So there's enough space for the player to make up their own backstory to where these things came from.
Does it have a skull and crossbones on it?
I don't see one.
Probably medicine then.
The gravity gloves are sort of the technological precursor to the gravity gun from Half-Life 2. We wanted a mechanic that didn't require you to carry a separate weapon or device. They allow you to access items and parts of the world without having to do a bunch of moving and bending and things that tend to fatigue you a little bit. So they work well as the gameplay, and they work well as making it easier to play a game in VR. I sort of always saw it as kind of a remote fishing pole sort of thing. You connect to it from a distance and you just kind of tug it, and that sends it sailing through the air, and then you get the catch. And I felt like that was the most VR kind of feel, having that little flick of the wrist. And tuning that was kind of tricky because we didn't want people to get exhausted from doing this constantly, but it couldn't be so subtle that you were constantly accidentally pulling things.
It's really fun to watch playtesters go from really not know how to do it, and then they just get really good at it really fast, and then, you know, in not too long, they're just like, and then just like catching things all over the place.
When you pull an object to yourself, we're actually using physics to drive it through the air so that it gets to your hand. And it's correcting constantly during the path. So once you pull something, if you move your hand, it will adjust its trajectory to get to where your hand is. So you can be in combat, you don't even have to be looking. As long as you've got your hand out, it's going to go to your hand.
I think it's important that it felt intuitive as well, because a lot of the players under duress when there's monsters and they're trying to shoot things all the time, and they don't have time to think, they just have time to do the action, and it better just work.
You don't have to remember a button press or some combo to get the thing to you. You want it over here, and you're very physically saying, get over here.
Especially when, and later on, you can like catch life grenades, actually. You can just catch and throw it back. And if you're really good with the gloves, it's like second nature.
We can take a lot of loot and sort of tuck it into corners and on beams and things like that where you normally couldn't get to it, but it gives you the incentive to explore a little more.
Some of the best looking things in VR are the things that you can examine close up, that you can hold in your hands. In Half-Life 2 it was kind of boxy, and it was like a lot of casing and with some manipulators on the end. But with the fidelity of today's games, we could really just take the casing off and you could see all the internal parts.
I like the engine light. That's my favorite. The little engine, the check engine light.
Yeah, I think that was a nice addition. That's Tristan, he came up with all that stuff.
Well, that was that was an attempt to tell the story that it's made out of found objects. It's not all manufactured, and an engine light, you know, straight out of a car dashboard seems to make a lot of sense. It also had to do the job of UI as well. It has like your health and ammo on there. We went through a lot of iteration of trying to figure out how best to display the information, how big it should be, whether we didn't want the players, you know, having to examine the back of their hand, they just want to be able to glance at it.
Did you come up with the hearts?
I think so, yeah. And I was playing Zelda at the time, and when you get a new little heart container on Zelda, it's just lovely.
As I was hooking up the hearts, I thought, well, this is neat. Like, I like it. I think it's cool because I love Zelda games myself. And I thought, but you know, people are going to kind of say that this is way too gamey. This doesn't work for Half-Life, so it'll change down the road. Somebody will have a new idea. And it just kind of stayed, and nobody had a problem with it. And over time, we just realized, no, we do like it.
We had a wristwatch, which was going to be the health and ammo reader, but we didn't have a wrist. And so we thought, well, we'll try it on the back of the hand. And that didn't look right, so then we lost the straps, and then it just got attached to the plate on the back of the hand with the rest of the gravity gloves. And then that's why there's a watch case there, was because it went through this iteration from being, you know, a useful piece of UI to just a piece of background found object visual design.
It all makes sense though.
Yeah, there's a backstory to all of it.
The main upgrade that you get is the flashlight that you can mount it on there. We had to do some extra work with the flashlight because when you're aiming it straight, it's fine, but players like to brace their weapon, and then the flashlight beam is pointing off to the side rather than where you're aiming. And initially we said, well, we'll just rotate the beam to give you the look you want. But Tristan wasn't going to have that. So that was not, what's your phrase for it?
Well, mechanically responsible.
Mechanically responsible.
So it either had to point at your teleport point on the ground, which is what its default position was, but like you say, when you're doing this, it's off over there. So we built in a little ball joint to the end of the flashlight, and there's two poses. It'll point at your teleport point, or if we know you're bracing the gun, it'll switch position.
So we had to animate the flashlight so it could articulate to redirect the beam.
Yeah.
So that it would be mechanically responsible.
Yes, that's important. Well, in VR, with a lot of the animated mechanical things, and because you are able to examine them in a lot more detail than on a normal flat game, it felt it was worth the extra effort to make sure these things all worked properly. It's fun to build that stuff as well. So.
I just like to pick up all the different things in the world and then just examine it with your hands, because we actually had to author a lot of custom content for how we can actually hold objects. Like, we don't think about how we actually grab objects as like human beings, but if you have to author them, you suddenly realize there's like a lot of ways one can try to grab on a chair or whatnot.
I could play with the gravity gloves all day. Throwing things out into the air and catching it midair and pulling it back to yourself, and you just keep doing that. It's kind of like juggling, single-handed juggling. It's very soothing.